Hey guys, tonight we are diving headfirst and you might want to hold your nose for this one into the golden age of piracy. But we're skipping the swashbuckling romance and the treasure chests overflowing with gold. Instead, we're going to get uncomfortably close to the gritty, grimy, and frankly, quite smelly reality of what it was actually like to live on a pirate ship. Let's just say, with the hygiene standards of the time, you might not even survive the first day without begging for a bar of soap before you get comfortable. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to know where you're listening from. Tell me your city and the time where you are right now in the comments below. It's always a treat to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The rough-hewn wooden gangplank groans under your weight. Each step is a tiny commitment, a small wobble that separates the solid, familiar grime of the port town from the unsteady, unknown world of the ship. You've made your choice. Maybe it was desperation, maybe a foolish thirst for adventure, or maybe the recruiting pirate just told a very convincing story about freedom and gold. Whatever the reason, you're here now. Your foot lands on the deck, and the solid thud feels final. And then it hits you. Not a cannonball, not a fist, but the smell. It's a physical presence, a thick, humid blanket of an odor that you feel in the back of your throat before you can even process it. Your first instinct is to take a shallow breath to try and filter it through your teeth. It doesn't work. The primary note is unwashed humanity, the sharp, sour tang of sweat that has soaked into wool and leather for weeks, maybe months. It's the collective musk of 50 men living in a space smaller than a city tavern, with no concept of a daily shower. Beneath that, there's the ghost of 1,000 spilled mugs of rum. A sickly sweet, fermented scent that has seeped into the very grain of the wood. It mingles with the damp, musty smell of the bilge water, sloshing somewhere deep below your feet. The primordial soup of stale seawater, leakage, and things you'd rather not contemplate. And weaving through it all is the sharp, medicinal smell of tar. You see it everywhere, slathered over the hull, worked into the thick rigging ropes that crisscross the sky above you. It's a necessary waterproofing agent, the ship's only defense against the relentless sea. Some sailors on naval and merchant ships were even nicknamed Jack Tars for this reason. Because the tar would get on their hands, their clothes, their hair. You realize with a sinking feeling that this smell will soon be your smell. You risk a deeper look around. The deck isn't the gleaming, polished floorboard of cinematic fantasy. It's a chaotic landscape of coiled ropes, stray barrels, and dark, suspicious-looking stains. A few chickens, oblivious to their eventual fate as dinner, peck at something unit unfightable near a cannon. The men of the crew are a gallery of hardship. Their faces are weathered by sun and wind, etched with lines of fatigue and suspicion. Some are missing teeth, others have faded, poorly rendered tattoos snaking up their arms. They aren't the dashing rogues you might have imagined. They look tough, yes, but they also look tired. This was the reality for most who turned to the black flag. The so-called golden age of piracy was a surprisingly short window, mainly from the 1650 seconds to the 1730 seconds. And the men who crewed these ships were often just ordinary sailors, fleeing the horrific conditions of the British Royal Navy or merchant fleets. In the Navy, the pay was abysmal, the discipline brutal, and the food infested. Piracy, for all its dangers, offered a strange sort of democracy. The crew voted on their captain. They had a clear code of conduct. The ship's articles and the loot was divided in a way that seemed almost comically fair compared to the world they'd left behind. You look at the faces of your new shipmates, and you can't help but wonder what brought each of them to this floating, smelly piece of wood. Was it truly a thirst for a more egalitarian society at sea? Was it pure, simple greed for Spanish silver? Or was it just the grim realization that this life, however short and dirty, was still better than the alternative. It's a question historians still debate, the complex two of motivations that pushed a man to go on the account. Paralyzed by the sensory overload, a man with a beard so tangled it looks like a small bird could nest in it, grunts in your direction. He doesn't smile. He just jerks a thumb towards a dark, narrow hatchway leading below deck. Find a hammock that ain't taken, he mutters, his voice raspy. Then stay out of the way. The invitation, if you can call it that, is clear. Your first day of work has begun, and your first task is to find a place to sleep. You take a breath, steeling yourself for whatever new horrors await in the darkness below. You nod, not wanting to attract any more attention, and make your way towards the hatch. The opening is a small, dark square in the deck, and as you approach, a wave of warm, stale air washes over you, carrying a scent that makes the deck smell seem like a spring meadow. You hesitate for just a moment, a brief, silent protest from your lungs, before swinging your legs over the edge and finding the top rung of a steep ladder. The wood is slick, not with water, but with a thin, greasy film of accumulated grime. You descend into the gloom. It's darker down here, and the air is thick, soupy, and hard to breathe. The sounds of the sea are muffled, replaced by the creaking groans of the ship's timbers, like an old man's aching bones. This is between the main deck and the cargo hold. And this, you realize with a dawning horror, is where you'll sleep. Welcome to your new luxury apartment. The ceiling is so low you have to stoop, your head brushing against the massive, rough-hewn beams above. Your eyes slowly adjust to the gloom, aided by a single, swaying lantern that casts long, dancing shadows. This isn't a dedicated bedroom. This is the gun deck. Lining the walls are the ship's cannons, huge lumps of iron squatting in the darkness, their muzzles staring blankly through the sealed gun ports, and strung between them, packed in like sardines in a rows, dozens of them. They hang in staggered. One could easily reach out and touch the 2 or 3 people nearest to him. This was a standard arrangement on nearly all ships of the era, a brutally efficient use of space. You had to live and sleep around the very tools of your violent trade. A symphony of human noise fills the space, a chorus of snores ranging from a soft whistle to a wet, guttural rattle, a hacking cough. From a dark corner, the murmur of men gambling with dice, their faces illuminated by a stolen candle stub, the soft, rhythmic sound of a knife sharpening on a whetstone. The air itself is a cocktail of human effluence. It's the deck smell, but concentrated, stewed, with new and alarming notes of stale breath, unwashed feet, and the faint, sweetish odor of sickness. You shuffle through the narrow passage between the hammocks, trying not to bump into anyone. A sleeping sailor shifts, and his arm dangles out, brushing against your leg. You flinch. You spot an empty hammock, a sad-looking strip of canvas hanging limply between two carriages. That must be yours. There's no mattress, no pillow, just the rough canvas and a thin, lumpy wool blanket that looks like it lost a fight with a family of moths. You've heard whispers that on some even more crowded vessels, they practiced a system later called hot bunking, or in this case, hot hammocking. 1 hammock for 2 men working opposite watches. As one man crawled out to go on deck, the other would crawl in, the canvas still warm from his body. You pray that's not the arrangement here. It's one of those grim, practical details of life at sea that often gets lost in the grander tales. As you stand there, contemplating your new bed, a flicker of movement on the floor catches your eye. The rat, sleek and fat from a diet of stolen scraps, scurries from beneath a barrel and vanishes into the shadows. Then you see another, and you become aware of a constant, faint, rustling, skittering sound. It's the sound of the ship's other crew, the rats, the cockroaches, the beetles. They are your Permon and true mates, a silent, crawling population that vastly outnumbers the human one. You look at the faces of the sleeping men, illuminated briefly as the lantern sways. They look so vulnerable in their sleep, mouths agape, limbs askew. And here lies a question historians still ponder: what were the social dynamics of this suffocating, like close space? The pirate code, the articles, created a framework for order on deck, but what about down here? Were they truly a band of brothers, looking out for one another in the dark, or was it a fragile truce, and every man for himself environment where a stray coin or a piece of bread could go missing from your kit while you slept? You have no way of knowing if the man snoring next to you will have your back in a fight or slit your throat for your boots. With a sigh, you hoist yourself into the hammock. It's an awkward, clumsy motion, and the whole thing swings wildly, threatening to tip you out onto the filthy floor. You finally settle, your body sinking into the canvas curve. The ship's gentle rocking, which felt pleasant on deck, is now a nauseating side-to-side lurch. Every creak of the hull is amplified. Every snore feels like it's right beside your ear. You pull the scratchy blanket up to your chin, and the smell of old sweat and damp wool fills your nostrils. You lie there, swaying in the dark, surrounded by strangers and vermin, listening to the groans of the ship and the men within it. You try to find a comfortable position, a moment of peace. But a new, urgent thought begins to push its way to the forefront of your mind, a simple biological need. Where on this floating prison does a man go to the toilet? The thought, once it appears, is impossible to ignore. It starts as a gentle suggestion and quickly escalates into an urgent, pressing demand. You carefully, clumsily, extract yourself from the hammock, your bare feet meeting the cold, slightly sticky deck. The idea of navigating the darkness of the 'tween deck again is unappealing. But you have no choice. You stumble back towards the ladder, guided by the faint rectangle of less dark night sky above the hatch. Climbing back onto the main deck is a relief. The air, which only an hour ago seemed foul, now feels fresh and clean by comparison. The sea breeze is a welcome caress on your face. The skeleton crew is on watch, their dark silhouettes moving quietly around the deck, their voices low and murmuring. You don't want to ask. It feels like an embarrassing, greenhorn question. So you do what any sensible new employee would do: you watch and you learn. You spot one of the sailors walk towards the very front of the ship, the pointy bit that juts out over the water. You follow at a discreet distance. He disappears over the bow. You creep closer, your curiosity overriding your fear of being yelled at. Peering over the edge, you finally understand. Protruding from the bowsprit, that long, thick spar that extends from the ship's front is a sort of grating or net. Below it, the sea churns and sprays. This, my friend, is the toilet. It's called the head, a term that originated because, on sailing ships, the toilet was always located at the head or bow of the vessel. The prevailing winds would, in theory, carry the smell away from the rest of the ship. A very optimistic theory, as you've already discovered. You watch the sailor. He braces himself against the rigging, perches precariously on the edge, and does his business directly into the ocean. There are no stalls, no privacy, just a man clinging to a rope with the vast, dark expanse of the Atlantic beneath him. It is, without a doubt, the most high-stakes bathroom experience you have ever witnessed. One good wave, one slip of a hand, and you're not just embarrassed, you're overboard. In the dark, and nobody might even notice until morning. This was the standard for centuries of seafaring. There was no internal plumbing, no septic system. The ocean was the toilet, and for the unlucky souls who couldn't make it to the head in time, perhaps due to seas inscus or a sudden bout of dysentery, any corner of the deck, or the scuppers, the drains at the edge of the deck would have to do. One can only imagine the state of the lower decks after a storm, when the hatches were battened down and 50 men were wrapped below with their churning stomachs. As you stand there, processing this new information, you notice a coiled rope hanging near the head. It's thick, wet, and frayed at the end. You realize with a sickening lurch what it's for. This is the communal toilet paper. A single piece of rope, dangling in the sea, to be used by everyone on board. It would be dragged in the water for a cursory rinse after use, a process that probably did little more than add a thick coating of salt. The thought of its journey through dozens of hands is profoundly unsettling. This is a level of sharing you were not prepared for. It's a small, disgusting detail, but one that perfectly illustrates the complete lack of understanding about hygiene and germ theory. They had no idea that this single object could be a superhighway for disease, passing infections from one crewman to the next with terrifying efficiency. You take your turn. You grip the tarred rigging, the rough fibers digging into your palms. The wind whips at your clothes, and the ship pitches and rolls beneath you. You try not to look down at the churning black water, at the mesmerizing, terrifying dance of the waves. You focus on the horizon, on the distant stars, on anything but your current, vulnerable position. You suddenly understand why so many illustrations of pirates show them with a rugged, pained expression. It probably wasn't from brooding over lost treasure. They were likely just trying to go to the bathroom in a 20-foot swell. The question of how exactly this worked in rough weather is one of those practicalities that history books tend to gloss over. Did they just not go? Did they risk it? Anyway, historians can only speculate on the grim realities, but it's safe to assume it was an unpleasant and dangerous affair. The design seems almost comically flawed, a perfect storm of inconvenience and peril. Having completed the harrowing ordeal, you make your way back from the bow, feeling a strange mix of relief and disgust. You pass one of your new shipmates, a man with a weathered face and a single gold hoop in his ear. He gives you a knowing, almost empathetic nod. It's a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding of the indignities of life at sea. You've passed a small unspoken initiation. You've used the head. You crawl back into your hammock, the damp chill of the sea air clinging to you. The tween deck smells no better than it did before, but now you have a new appreciation for the complexities of this floating world. You lie back, the hammock swaying, and as you drift into an uneasy sleep, you can't help but think about your clothes. The salt spray from the head has misted your trousers, and it occurs to you that you have no other pair to change into. The next morning, you wake up to the rhythmic creaking of the ship and the distinct feeling of being damp. It's not just the sea spray from your nocturnal adventure in general. Pervasive humidity has settled into your bones and, more importantly, into your clothes. You're wearing the only set of clothes. You own a rough linen shirt, a pair of thick wool breeches, and a worn leather vest. This is your uniform, your work attire, your sleepwear, and your formal dining outfit, all rolled into one. You look around at the other men as they stir and begin their day. No one is reaching into a sea chest for a fresh shirt. They simply get up, shake themselves like dogs, and are ready to go. The concept of a daily change of clothes is a luxury as distant and unimaginable as a hot bath. Your single outfit is your second skin, and it will bear witness to every drop of sweat, every splash of seawater, every spilled bit of food, and every smear of tar for the foreseeable future. You run a hand over your breeches. The wool is coarse and scratchy, and it's already starting to smell like you. And like the ship, it's absorbing the ambient odors of tar, sweat, and bilge water, becoming a wearable olfactory diary of your journey. The idea of laundry day seems like a joke. Where would you wash it with what fresh water? The ship's supply of fresh water is more precious than rum and is strictly rationed for drinking. Washing clothes with it would be a crime punishable by a flogging, or at the very least, a communal beating. The only other option is seawater, but that presents its own problems. Washing clothes in salt water doesn't really get them clean, it just makes them salty. And when they dry, a process that could take days in the damp sea air, the salt crystals left behind in the fabric would be intensely irritating, chafing your skin raw with every movement. For this reason, most sailors simply didn't bother. They wore their clothes until they literally fell apart. This brings up a fascinating, if slightly grimy, point about pirate fashion. We have this image of pirates in billowing white shirts and flamboyant coats. The reality was far more practical and far less clean. Clothing was a tool. Sailors often coated their clothes and hats in tar or pitch, the same stuff used to waterproof the ship's hull. This made their garments stiff, uncomfortable, and incredibly smelly, but it also made them waterproof, which was a vital feature when you're constantly being drenched by waves and rain. A dry sailor is a warm sailor, and a warm sailor is less likely to get sick. So they sacrifice comfort and cleanliness for practicality. Your future fashion choices will be dictated not by style, but by survival. You also notice the materials. Almost everyone is wearing wool. While it might seem like a strange choice for sometimes tropical climates, wool has a remarkable property: it can insulate even when wet. Cotton, by contrast, becomes cold and heavy, clinging to the skin and sucking away body heat. So, a scratchy, smelly, woolen sweater was a sailor's best friend, even in the Caribbean. As you sit on the edge of your hammock, you notice a rip in your sleeve. It's a small tear for now, but you know it will grow. You have no needle, no thread. Mending was a crucial sailor's skill, often done with a specialized sailor's pommel leather strap worn over the hand to push the needle and thread unraveled from old canvas. If you couldn't mend your own clothes, you'd have to hope they held together until you could get new ones. And how did a pirate get new clothes? By stealing them. When a prize ship was taken, clothing was often as valuable a part of the plunder as anything else. A new shirt or a sturdy pair of boots was a treasure in its own right. There's a strange irony in the idea of a band of criminals whose actions were so disruptive to trade, being utterly dependent on that same trade for their most basic necessities. Historians still debate the finer points of pirate attire. Were the captains like Bartholomew Blackbeard, Roberts, or Jack Rackham truly as flamboyant as legends claim? Did they really wear fine silks and velvets taken from wealthy passengers? Some accounts suggest they did, treating fine clothes as a mark of status and a way to flaunt their success. But for the average, anonymous pirate like you, fashion was about function, not flash. Your single, increasingly fragrant outfit is your reality. You will work in these clothes, eat in them, sleep in them, fight in them. Then when they finally disintegrate, you'll have to hope there's a prize ship on the horizon with a well-stocked wardrobe. Until then, you and your outfit are in this together, for better or for worse. A thought crosses your mind: if the clothes are this permanent, what about the body underneath them? The idea of a bath seems like a distant dream. The thought of a bath lingers in your mind like a sweet, impossible fantasy. Back on land, even a quick wash with a bucket of cold water was a ritual you took for granted. Here the very idea seems absurd. Days turn into a week, and the grime becomes a part of you. A thin, salty crust forms on your skin from the constant sea spray, and your own sweat glues your shirt to your back. You feel sticky, all the time. One sweltering afternoon, during a period of calm, you watch as a few of the more veteran sailors take advantage of the still weather. This, you think with a flicker of hope, must be bath time. But it's not what you expect. One of them lowers a wooden bucket over the side on a rope, hauls up a sloshing load of seawater, and simply dumps it over his head. He gasps as the cool water hits him, then scrubs at his face and arms with his bare hands. He doesn't use soap. There is no soap. Soap was a rare and valuable commodity, not something to be wasted on daily hygiene. He is, in effect, just rinsing off the top layer of sweat with salt water. It does little to combat the underlying layer of grease and dirt, and once the water evaporates, it will leave behind that same itchy, crystalline salt residue you treated on your clothes. This is the pirate's version of a shower. A quick, functional, and deeply unsatisfying rinse. Some sailors might not even bother with this, simply going for a swim alongside the ship if the weather and the waters were calm enough. But this came with its own risks, sharks being the most obvious one. It's a bit of a grim cost-benefit analysis: risk being eaten by a shark or continue to marinate in your own filth. Most chose the latter. This lack of bathing wasn't unique to pirates. In the 17th and 18th centuries, The very concept of bathing as we know it was different. On land, full-body immersion in water was often viewed with suspicion, believed to open the pores and let in disease. People cleaned themselves by changing their linen shirts. The linen was thought to absorb the body's impurities, and by scrubbing their hands and face. For a pirate, who had no change of linen and no fresh water to spare, even this minimal standard was impossible. You decide to try the bucket method. You awkwardly lower it over the side, the rope rough in your hands. It fills with a heavy gulp, and you struggle to haul it back onto the deck. The water is a beautiful, clear blue in the bucket, a tiny piece of the vast ocean. You take a deep breath and tip it over your head. The shock of the cold is intense, a sudden, sharp gasp that takes your breath away. For a glorious few seconds, it's incredibly refreshing. The water sluices down your body, washing away the immediate layer of sweat and dust. You scrub at your hair, feeling the salt stiffen it almost instantly. But the relief is short-lived. As you stand there, dripping on the hot deck, the water begins to evaporate, and the familiar itchy feeling starts to creep back in. You haven't really got unclean. You've just exchanged one type of grime for another. You are now a human salt lick. This brings up another unpleasant topic, what this lack of hygiene meant for health. The skin is the body's largest organ, its first line of defense against infection. But when it's constantly coated in filth and chafe draw by salt and rough clothing, it can't do its job properly. Small cuts, insect bites, and rashes that would be minor annoyances on land could easily become infected in this environment. Without access to antibiotics or even basic antiseptics, a simple infection could fester, leading to agonizing abscesses, blood poisoning, and death. It's a sobering thought that the most dangerous thing on this ship might not be the cannons or the cutlasses, but a simple lack of cleanliness. Some historians have argued that, in a way, the pirates' filth might have offered a strange kind of protection. Being constantly exposed to a wide array of bacteria from a young age could have built up a more robust immune system. This is a version of the hygiene hypothesis, and while it's an interesting idea, it's one of those things that's almost impossible to prove. The line between building immunity and dying of a festering wound was probably a very thin one. What is certain is that their lives were a constant gamble with infection. As the sun begins to set, casting a golden glow over the water, you feel a new sensation. It's not an itch from the salt. It's a dull, persistent throb. It's deep inside your mouth. You probe with your tongue and find the source, a molar in the back. A tooth that has been a quiet, background ache for a while has now decided to become the star of the show. Your heart sinks. On land, a toothache is a miserable experience. You can only imagine what it means out here, and you have a dreadful feeling you're about to find out. The dull throb in your jaw is a quiet but insistent companion through your evening watch. By the time you crawl into your hammock, it has escalated to a sharp, rhythmic pulse of pain that syncs up with the creaking of the ship. Sleep is impossible. Every lurch of the vessel sends a fresh jolt through your jaw. You try lying on one side, then the other. You press your cheek against the rough canvas of the hammock, hoping the pressure might bring some relief. It doesn't. By morning, your cheek is swollen, and the pain is a blinding, all-consuming reality. It's no longer just in your tooth, it radiates through your entire skull. You can't eat. The idea of biting down on anything, even a piece of soft bread, is terrifying. One of the older sailors, a man named Silas with a face like a weathered map, sees you grimacing on clutching your jaw. He gives you a look that is half pity, half annoyance. "Toothworm got ya, lad," he grunts. The toothworm was a surprisingly persistent belief for centuries. People genuinely thought that tooth decay and the associated pain were caused by a tiny worm burrowing into the tooth. It's a chillingly graphic image, but it was their best explanation for the mysterious, agonizing decay that plagued them. Of course, the real culprit was diet and a complete lack of dental hygiene. Sugar, which became more common as pirates plundered ships coming from the Caribbean sugar plantations. was a major factor, combined with a diet of hard, starchy biscuits and no toothbrushing. It was a recipe for disaster. Silas gestures with his thumb towards the ship's carpenter, a burly man named Finn who is currently mending a splintered railing. He's the tooth puller, Silas says, as if it's the most normal thing in the world. Your blood runs cold. The ship's carpenter, not a doctor, not even the ship's cook who doubles as a surgeon, but the man who works with hammers and saws. In the world of 18th century seafaring, there was no such thing as a specialized dentist. Basic medical care was handled by the ship's surgeon if they were lucky enough to have one. But for teeth, the task often fell to whoever had the strongest hands and the right tools. The ship's carpenter or the blacksmith fit the bill perfectly. They had pliers, they had tongs, and they were used to applying brute force. The concept of saving a tooth, of fillings or root canals, was science fiction. The only cure for a toothache was extraction. You have no choice. The pain is unbearable, and you know it will only get worse. An abscessed tooth could lead to a systemic infection, a fever, and death. So, with a sense of dread that eclipses even your first day's anxiety, you approach Finn. He stops his work and looks you over. He sees your swollen cheek and nods slowly. "Aye," he says, his voice a low rumble. "Sit." He gestures to an overturned barrel. "There is no anesthetic. Your only comfort will be a generous swig of rum from a communal bottle that he offers you. You take it, the fiery liquid burning a path down your throat, but doing little to numb the terror. The rum serves a dual purpose. It's a mild painkiller, but more importantly, it's for courage, both for you and for him." He wipes his hands on his greasy breeches and then pulls out a tool from his leather pouch. It's not a delicate dental instrument. It's a pair of heavy iron pliers, stained with rust and God knows what else. He doesn't sterilize it. He might wipe it on his shirt, if you're lucky. Finn tells you to open your mouth. You hesitate, your whole body trembling. Another sailor comes to stand behind you, ready to hold your head steady. Finn peers into your mouth, his large, calloused finger poking around unceremoniously until he finds the offending tooth. "That's the one," he grunts. "This'll be quick." It is not quick. He clamps the pliers onto your tooth. The cold, hard metal sends a shockwave of agony through you. And then he pulls. It's a grinding, twisting motion, a hideous sensation of pressure and splintering. You hear a crack that seems to echo inside your skull. Your vision whites out from the pain. You grip the sides of the barrel, your knuckles turning white, a strangled cry escaping your throat. He pulls again, bracing his foot against the barrel, putting his whole body weight into it. There is another crack, a wet, tearing sound, and then a sudden, shocking release of pressure. He holds up the pliers. Clamped in the jaws is your tooth, a mangled, bloody thing with a long, curved root. Your mouth is filled with the coppery taste of blood. The immediate, sharp pain of the extraction is immense, but beneath it, you can feel that the deep, throbbing ache is gone. The relief is so profound it almost makes you weep. Finn pats you on the shoulder, a gesture that feels both brutal and kind. "Spit it out," he says. "Rinse with salt water or more rum." This horrifying procedure was the reality of dental care, and historians still debate the frequency and success of such operations. How many jaws were broken, how many infections were introduced by the unsterilized tools, how many men died from complications. The skeletal remains of sailors from this period often show evidence of horrific dental problems and botched extractions. As you stumble away, spitting blood over the side of the ship, you're left with a gaping, painful hole in your gum and a newfound appreciation for the simple act of chewing. You also have a new nagging sensation. It's an itch, a persistent itch in your hair. The hole in your gum is a raw, throbbing reminder of your recent ordeal. But the new itch is something different. It's a low-grade, persistent irritation on your scalp. At first, you dismiss it as a reaction to the salt water, or maybe just a symptom of your generally unwashed state. You scratch at it idly, your fingernails scraping against your scalp, but the itch doesn't go away. It gets worse. It becomes a maddening, crawling sensation, a feeling like tiny invisible things are moving through your hair. You are, of course, not alone. You notice your shipmates scratching. A lot. They scratch their heads, their beards, the collars of their shirts. They do it unconsciously, a constant, twitchy gesture that is as much a part of their body language as spitting or squinting into the sun. Welcome to the next level of communal living. You have lice, head lice, body lice, and their close cousins. Fleas were not just a nuisance on a pirate ship, they were an inevitability. They were as much a part of the crew as the rats and the cockroaches. In the cramped, intrigue between decks, with men sleeping packed together and sharing blankets, these parasites spread with astonishing speed. They were the ultimate stowaways, passed from man to man, from port to port, an invisible, ever-present plague. One evening, sitting in the dim light of the swaying lantern, you see Silas, the old sailor, performing a strange ritual. He has his shirt off and is holding it close to the flame of a candle, peering at the seams with intense concentration. Every so often, he makes a sharp pinching motion with his fingers and you hear a faint but distinct pop. He is cracking lice. This was a common and grimly satisfying pastime for sailors. Body lice tend to live and lay their eggs in the seams of clothing. The sailors would run the seams over a candle flame to drive the lice out, then crush them between their thumbnails. It was a small, temporary victory in a war they could never truly win. Your own scalp is now a constant torment. The itching is relentless, driving you to distraction during your watch and keeping you awake at night. You finally ask Silas what to do. He shrugs, a gesture of weary resignation. Shave it, he says simply, or get used to it. This was one of the primary methods of pest control. Many sailors, pirates included, kept their hair cropped very short or shaved their heads entirely. It wasn't a fashion statement, it was a practical defense against lice. A shaved head offered no home for the parasites. This is likely one reason why bandanas and headscarves were so common. They weren't just for looking dashing, they protected a shaved, bald scalp from the brutal sun. Beards were another matter, perhaps as a mark of pride, and were forced to engage in constant combing out rituals, often with fine tooth combs carved from bone or wood, if they were lucky enough to own one. You consider the razor. It's the same sharp, straight-edged blade used for mending sails or cutting rope. There's no shaving cream, no hot towel. The best you could hope for is a bit of seawater to wet your head before the cold steel starts scraping away. The alternative is to let the infestation flourish, and these weren't just an itchy nuisance. Body lice, in particular, are carriers of some truly nasty diseases, most notably typhus, which was often called ship fever or gale fever because it thrived in crowded, unsanitary conditions like prisons and ships. An outbreak of typhus could sweep through a crew with terrifying speed, leaving men delirious with fever, racked with pain, and often dead within a couple of weeks. It could disable a ship more effectively than a broadside from a naval frigate. Historians still discuss the immense impact of louse-borne diseases on naval and military history. Many campaigns were arguably won or lost, not by strategy, but by which side had the healthier lice population. Deciding you'd rather be bald than be a walking habitat, you agree to the shave. A shipmate, the same one who held your head for the tooth pulling, offers to do the honors. You sit on the same barrel, a grim sense of déjà vu washing over you. He lathers your head with a bit of seawater and begins to scrape. It's a rough, unpleasant process. The blade pulls and nicks, leaving a trail of goosenst and a few small nicks in its wake. Clumps of your greasy, salt-stiffened hair fall to the deck. When he's done, your scalp feels strangely naked and vulnerable, exposed to the breeze for the first time. But the itching is gone. The relief is immediate and immense. You run a hand over your newly smooth head. It feels bizarre, but clean, or at least cleaner. You've solved one problem, but as you sit there, a new sensation begins to make itself known. It's a gnawing emptiness in your stomach. The ship's bell rings, signaling the distribution of the daily meal, and you're about to be introduced to the cornerstone of the pirate diet. The call to mealtime isn't met with cheers of excitement, but with a kind of weary, resigned shuffling. You follow the other men to the galley, which is little more than a smoky, cramped corner of the deck with a brick firebox for cooking. The ship's cook, a one-eyed man named Patches, whose primary qualification seems to be his ability to not set the ship on fire, is doling out the day's rations. He slops a ladle, lefuel of something gray and lumpy, into your wooden bowl, and then hands you the main course, a thick, yellowish, rock-hard square. This is ship's biscuit, also known as hardtack. You stare at the object in your hand. It feels less like food and more like a building material. It's dense, heavy, and completely unyielding. You tap it against the side of the ship, it makes a sharp clack. This was the staple food for sailors for centuries, and for a simple reason: it was designed for longevity. Hardtack is made from a simple recipe of flour, water, and sometimes a bit of salt, baked multiple times until it is completely devoid of moisture, resistant to mold, and capable of lasting for months, even years, in theory. The problem wasn't the biscuit itself, but its traveling companions. You look closer at your piece of hardtack. The surface is pitted with tiny holes and tunnels, like a miniature ant farm. As you watch, a small, pale grub wriggles its way out of one of the holes. This is a weevil larva. The grain used to make the flour was almost always infested with weevil eggs, and over the long weeks at sea, these eggs would hatch. The biscuits became, in essence, a living pantry. You look around at the other men. No one seems bothered. They have a well-practiced technique. A veteran sailor next to you takes his biscuit and smacks it firmly against the wooden rail. He doesn't do it to break it, but to dislodge the inhabitants. A small shower of weevils and grubs falls out onto the deck, where they are eagerly snatched up by one of the ship's chickens. Extra protein, the sailor grunts with a black-toothed grin, seeing the look on your face. This grim ritual was so common that sailors had a nickname for the weevils: bargemen. Some sailors preferred to eat their biscuits in the dark, so they wouldn't have to see what they were consuming. You decide to brave it. Trying to bite directly into the hardtack is a fool's errand, a surefire way to end up back at the carpenter's mercy. The standard method is to break it into smaller pieces and soak it in whatever liquid you have available. You dip a corner into the lumpy stew in your bowl. It's often slightly, but only to the consistency of wet cardboard. You take a tentative bite. The taste is bland, stale, a faint, dusty flavor of old flour, mixed with the vaguely savory taste of the stew, and something else, a slightly nutty, bitter undertone that you try very hard not to identify as weevil. The stew itself isn't much better. It's a concoction known as salmagnudi, or, more simply, burgoo. It's a catch-all dish, but wait for the cook to use up whatever was on hand. The base was usually oatmeal or crushed biscuit, boiled with water and whatever meat was available. The meat was almost always heavily salted beef or pork, stored in barrels for months on end. The salting process was so intense that the meat became as hard as wood. It had to be soaked for hours just to become chewable, and even then, it was tough and stringy, with a flavor that was more salt than meat. To mask the taste of the semi-putrid meat in the stale biscuit, the cook would throw in anything else he could find: onions, garlic if they were lucky, pickled vegetables, anchovies, a heavy dose of pepper, and maybe even a few of the ship's chickens if the captain was feeling generous. The result is the gray, lumpy mush currently in your bowl. Its food is pure fuel, a tasteless, textureless slurry designed to fill your stomach and give you enough energy to haul on a rope. There are no fresh vegetables, no fruit. The only greens you've seen are the small patches of algae growing on the water barrels. Historians often debate the exact recipes and the nutritional content, or lack thereof, of a pirate's diet. Did they eat better than sailors in the Royal Navy generally? Yes. When they captured a prize ship, they would feast on the fresh livestock, fruits, and fine foods they found on board. These were periods of gluttony and celebration. But between captures, during the long lean weeks of patrolling, their diet reverted to this miserable baseline of hardtack and salted meat. This boom and bust cycle of feasting and famine was a hallmark of pirate life. You force down a few more mouthfuls of the stew and the soggy biscuit. It sits in your stomach like a lead weight. You're grateful for the calories, but the experience is deeply unpleasant. You feel a powerful thirst coming on, a side effect of all the salt. You look towards the barrel with the ladle, the one marked WATER. Relief, you think. But you're about to discover that on this ship, even the water is a challenge. You stumble towards the water barrel, your mouth feeling like it's full of sand. The barrel, known as a scuttlebutt, has a ladle chained to it to prevent it from being lost or stolen. A small group of men are already there, and a sort of informal queue has formed. Water discipline is strict. A designated officer, usually the quartermaster, oversees the rationing. Each man gets a set amount per day, usually around a half-gallon, for drinking. It's a measure of the water's preciousness that it's guarded so carefully. When it's your turn, you eagerly dip the ladle into the barrel. You lift it to your lips, anticipating the cool, clean taste of fresh water. What you get is a mouthful of warm, slightly slimy liquid that tastes faintly of swamp. You recoil, sputtering, nearly spitting it out. It's a taste that's both familiar and alien, the flavor of stagnation. This is the grim reality of water storage at sea in the age of sail. The water was collected on land, often from rivers or streams that weren't particularly clean to begin with, and stored in wooden casks. Over weeks and months in the sweltering, unventilated hold of the ship, that water would change. The wooden barrels themselves would leach tannins into the water, giving it a brownish tint and a woody flavor. But the real problem was what grew in it. The stagnant water was a perfect breeding ground for algae, bacteria, and all manner of microscopic life. A greenish or brownish slime would form on the inside of the barrels and float in filmy clouds within the water itself. It would start to smell. First like a pond, then like rotten eggs as anaerobic bacteria produced hydrogen sulfide. It was, in short, disgusting. Sailors had a whole lexicon to describe the stages of their water supply's decay, from sweet and fresh to stinking. You force yourself to swallow the mouthful. It's wet, and that's its only redeeming quality. You watch as the man behind you takes his ration without flinching. The veterans are used to it. They knew that after a few weeks, the water would go through this foul-tasting phase. Interestingly, they also knew that if left for even longer, the water would sometimes break and become clear again. The bacterial bloom would die off, sink to the bottom as sediment, and the water would become more palatable, though never truly fresh. It's a strange, counterintuitive piece of folk knowledge that modern science can explain through ecological succession in a closed system, but to them, it was just a quirk of life at sea. To make the water drinkable, sailors developed a number of coping mechanisms. The most common was to simply mix it with their daily ration of alcohol. Adding rum or beer did a few things. It masked the foul taste and smell. The alcohol also acted as a mild antiseptic, killing some of the harmful bacteria, making the water safer to drink. This is one of the primary reasons why sailors were given a daily grog ration. It wasn't just about morale. It was a public health measure, a way to get them to hydrate without getting sick. The term grog itself comes from the British Navy's Admiral Vernon, nicknamed Old Grog for his Gibraltar cloak, who in 1740 ordered that the sailors' rum ration be diluted with water to cut down on drunkenness. There's a continuing debate among maritime historians about how much sailors understood the link between bad water and disease. They certainly knew that stinking water often coincided with outbreaks of dysentery, which they called the bloody flux. This agonizing intestinal ailment could incapacitate a crew, and was a common cause of death. They might not have known about bacteria, but they knew correlation. They knew that the water from certain ports was good and would last longer, while water from other sources was bad and would lead to sickness. You take another sip from the ladle, trying to hold your breath to avoid the smell. You think of the rum. You haven't been given your ration yet, but you now understand its profound importance. It's not just a drink to get you through the dull moments. It's a flavor enhancer, a water purifier, a painkiller, a currency, and a courage booster. It is the lifeblood of the ship, the one thing that makes the hardtack, the salty meat, and the slimy water bearable. As you turn away from the scuttlebutt, the foul taste lingering in your mouth, you see Patches the cook emerging from the hold, wrestling another barrel of salted beef onto the deck. The sun beats down, and you can already imagine the salty, tough meal that awaits you tomorrow. Life at sea, you're beginning to realize, is a relentless cycle of enduring minor and major miseries. Every basic necessity, sleep, food, water, even going to the toilet is a challenge, a small hardship to be overcome. You find a shady spot on the deck, lean against the warm wood, and close your eyes. The ship rocks gently. The pain in your jaw has subsided to a dull ache. Your scalp is blissfully itch-free, and your stomach is full if not happy. For a moment, it's almost peaceful, and then you remember the rum, and you understand why every man on board looks forward to that particular moment of the day with an almost religious fervor. Later that afternoon, the quartermaster, a stern-faced man with intricate knots tied into his beard, finally calls out the grog ration. A line forms instantly, the mood palpably lighter than it was at mealtime. This is the highlight of the day, a moment of government's ancient bliss. You get in line, your wooden cup in hand. The quartermaster stands beside a large barrel, a brass measure in his hand, dispensing a carefully measured portion of dark, amber liquid to each man. When it's your turn, he pours the rum into your cup. The rich, sweet smell of molasses and alcohol is a glorious antidote to the ship's other, less pleasant aromas. This isn't the refined, aged rum you might find in a gentleman's club. This is Kill Devil, a raw, potent spirit, freshly distilled and fiery. You take a sip, it's strong. It burns your throat and warms your stomach, a wave of heat spreading through your chest. The foul taste of the swamp water is instantly erased, replaced by the comforting fire of the rum. You see now why this is so much more than a drink, it's medicine. You think back to the tooth pulling. The rum didn't kill the pain, but it certainly made the terror more manageable. It was the only anesthetic available. A man with a shattered leg or a deep cutlass wound would be given as much rum as he could swallow before the surgeon went to work. It was a crude numbing agent for both body and mind. It was also a disinfectant. After your tooth was pulled, you were told to rinse with rum or salt water. The high alcohol content of the rum would have helped to clean the wound, killing some of the bacteria and reducing the risk of infection. They would pour it directly into open wounds for the same reason, a painful but potentially life-saving application of folk medicine. And, of course, it was a mental salve. Life on a pirate ship was a unique combination of mind-numbing boredom and moments of sheer terror. For weeks on end, nothing would happen. You'd be stuck on this floating piece of wood with the same men, the same daily chores. The tedium could be maddening. The daily rum ration broke that monotony. It was a small, predictable pleasure in a life of uncertainty. It greased the wheels of social interaction, turning a crew of tense, irritable men into a slightly more jovial, if louder, group. The songs would start, stories would be told, and for a brief time, the harsh reality of their existence would be softened and blurred at the edges. This reliance on alcohol was universal in the age of sail. The British Royal Navy's official daily ration was a pint of rum or a gallon of beer. Pirates, being a more democratic and pleasure-seeking society, likely drank even more. The ship's articles often laid out specific rules about drinking. While drinking was encouraged, being drunk and unable to perform your duties, especially during a battle, was a serious offense, oft unpunishable by marooning or worse. It was a fine line to walk. The crew needed to be kept happy, but also sober enough to fight and sail the ship. It's a point of academic discussion, just how central rum was to the pirate economy itself. Some historians argue that rum, sugar, and slaves formed a triangle trade that pirates both disrupted and participated in. They would plunder ships carrying molasses from the Caribbean, sell it or trade it in ports in North America, where they would be distilled into rum, which was then sometimes traded for other goods. Rum wasn't just a drink, it was a liquid currency. As you sip your ration, you feel the tension in your shoulders ease. The world seems a little less harsh. The constant, low-grade misery of your existence, the damp clothes, the bad food, the cramped quarters fades into the background. You understand the pact you make with this drink. It offers a temporary escape, a moment of warmth and camaraderie in a cold, brutal world. But the cost is dependency. The ship runs on wind and rope, but the crew runs on rum. You lean back against the mast, watching the sun dip towards the horizon. The sky is ablaze with ore-engine purple. A few men have started a sea shanty, their voices rough but surprisingly harmonious. For the first time, you feel a flicker of something that isn't fear or disgust. It's a sense of belonging, however strange and precarious. You are one of them now, a man in a filthy shirt on a wooden ship in the middle of the ocean, finding solace in a cup of cheap rum, almost beautiful. But your tranquility is interrupted by a sudden commotion near the galley. A man has slipped on the deck and his leg is bent at an unnatural angle. A cry goes up, "Get the surgeon," and you're about to meet the man responsible for patching you all back together. The cry for the surgeon doesn't summon a man in a clean white coat. Instead, the ship's cook, Patches, wipes his greasy hands on his apron, mutters a curse, and lumbers over to the injured man. Yes, the one-eyed man who boils the salt beef and slops the burgoo is also the chief medical officer. This was a shockingly common arrangement. On many pirate ships, the cook and the surgeon were the same person. The logic, in a way, was grimly practical. Both jobs involved sharp knives and dismemberment. The cook carved up chickens and pigs, the surgeon carved up men. It was seen as a transferable skill set. Furthermore, the galley was the only place on the ship with a constant source of fire and boiling water, which were essential for some medical procedures, though their understanding of sterilization was non-existent. So, the man with the meat cleaver became the man with the bone saw. You watch, morbidly fascinated, as Patches kneels beside the screaming sailor. The man's shin is clearly broken, the bone jutting out at a sickening angle. Patches doesn't waste time with a gentle bedside manner. He yells for room, a lot of it. Another man is sent to fetch the surgeon's toolkit. This is a moment of high drama. There are no private operating rooms, no sterile fields. Surgery is a public spectacle, performed on the open deck with the entire crew as an audience. The operating table is a coil of rope or a sea chest. The men hold the injured sailor's arms and his good leg, pinning him to the deck. Patches pours a generous amount of rum down the man's throat, and then, for good measure, splashes some over the wound. They thought this cleaned it, and while the alcohol might have killed some surface germs, it was a far cry from modern antiseptic practice. The tool kit arrives. It's a wooden box, and when Patches opens it, it looks less like a medical kit and more like a collection of torture implements. Inside, nestled on a bed of stained velvet, are a variety of terrifying metal objects, long probes, wicked-looking hooks, and the centerpiece, a large, heavy-toothed amputation saw. There are also thick needles and gut for suturing, and branding irons used for cauterizing wounds. The tools are not clean. They are wiped down after use, perhaps, but they carry the ghostly remnants of every previous operation. In this case, a full amputation isn't needed yet. Patches' job is to set the bone. With a grunt of effort, he grabs the man's leg and, with a sickening crunch that you can hear across the deck, yanks the bone back into rough alignment. The sailor's scream is cut short as he mercifully passes out, either from the pain or the rum. Patches then takes wooden splints, probably just spare pieces of barrel stave, and binds the leg tightly with strips of canvas. The whole procedure is brutal, swift, and performed with a kind of rough competence. Patches is not a trained physician. Most ship surgeons weren't. While the Royal Navy had a more formal system of surgeons' mates, pirate surgeons were a mixed bag. Some were indeed legitimately trained doctors who had been captured and forced into service. A skilled surgeon was an incredibly valuable asset, and pirates would often offer them a full share of the plunder to convince them to stay willingly. A man who could save your leg was worth his weight in gold. But many, like Patches, were simply crewmen who had shown an aptitude for butchery, or had picked up folk remedies. Their knowledge was a hodgepodge of half-remembered medical theory, sailor superstition, and practical experience. They knew how to stitch a wound, set a bone, and, most importantly, how to amputate a limb. But their understanding of the why was deeply flawed. They didn't know about germs. They believed in the ancient theory of humors that the body was balanced by four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and that sickness was caused by an imbalance. This is why bleeding a patient was such a common practice. They thought they were releasing an excess of bad blood. Historians still debate the effectiveness of these pirate surgeons. The survival rate for their patients is a matter of pure speculation. The line between a cook who could successfully set a bone and one who would turn a simple fracture into a fatal, gangrenous infection was terrifyingly thin. It all came down to luck, the constitution of the patient, and the random chance of whether the uncleaned knife introduced deadly bacteria. As the crew carries the unconscious sailor below deck to his hammock, you are left with a profound sense of your own fragility. Your life and limbs are in the hands of a man who, just an hour ago, was stirring a pot of lumpy stew. You look at your own hands, your own legs. You realize that every splinter, every rope burn, every small cut carries with it a new and terrible weight. On this ship, there are no minor injuries. The incident with the broken leg leaves a lingering unease among the crew. You find yourself moving more carefully, watching where you place your feet, instinctively more protective of your own body. The ever-present risk of injury, which had been an abstract concept, is now a vivid reality. Then you start to notice the small things, the minor wounds that are an everyday part of life on a working ship. You see a man stumble while coiling a heavy rope. The rough hem scraping along, raw patch on his forearm. He curses, spits on it, and keeps working. Another man, mending a sail, jabs the heavy needle deep into his thumb. He yelps, sticks the thumb in his mouth to suck away the blood, and then wraps it in a dirty strip of cloth torn from his own shirt. A splinter from the deck, a common annoyance, becomes a source of anxiety, wincing as you try to get the tiny sliver of wood out, knowing that leaving it in is a gamble. These aren't dramatic, battle-inflicted wounds. They are the mundane, everyday injuries of manual labor. But in this environment, they are ticking time bombs. The deck you walk on is filthy, coated in a mixture of dirt, spilled food, animal droppings, and who knows what else. The ropes you handle are stiff, with tar and salt, and have passed through countless unwashed hands. The air itself is thick with moisture, creating a perfect environment for bacteria to thrive. A simple cut, if not properly cleaned in it, could become infected within a day. The area would turn red, swell, then become hot to the touch. The yellow pus would begin to form. The body's immune system was fighting a battle, but it was doing so without any support. The pirates' diet, lacking in essential vitamins like vitamin C, weakened their immune response, making them even more susceptible. If the infection wasn't contained, it could lead to cellulitis, a deeper infection of the skin, or an abscess, a painful, pus-filled lump. The surgeon or cook might try to lance the abscess with a knife to drain it, a procedure that was both agonizing and risky, as it could introduce new bacteria deeper into the wound. The real terror was gangrene. If a wound became deeply infected and the blood supply was cut off, the tissue would begin to die. The skin would turn black, a foul-smelling liquid would ooze from the site, and the infection would begin to spread up the limb. Once gangrene set in, there was only one solution, the one that every sailor dreaded to saw. A small, insignificant cut on your finger could, in the space of a week, cost you your entire arm. This fear of infection shaped the sailors' lives. They developed a host of folk remedies to try and ward it off. One of the most common was to use tar. The same pitch used to waterproof the ship's hull was often smeared over a fresh wound. It was a thick, sticky, antiseptic barrier. It wasn't sterile. Of course, the tar pot was open to the air and likely full of dirt, but the phenols and other chemicals in the wood tar did have some genuine antibacterial properties. It was a case of fighting filth with a slightly more medicinal kind of filth. Another popular, if bizarre, treatment was the spiderweb cure. Sailors would collect spider webs and press them into a wound to stop the bleeding. We now know that spider silk contains vitamin K, which aids in blood clotting, and may have some mild antiseptic and antifungal properties. It's a fascinating example of folk medicine hitting upon something that actually worked, even if they had no idea why. It's one of those remedies that historians are still exploring, trying to separate fact from sailor's yarn. You look down at your own hands. They are no longer the hands of the person who boarded this ship. They are calloused, the skin cracked and stained with tar. There are a half-dozen tiny cuts and scrapes on your knuckles. You look at them with a new sense of paranoia. Is that faint redness around that cut from yesterday new? Is it just irritation, or the start of something more sinister? You're living in a world without antibiotics, without even a clean bandage. Your body is on its own, fighting a constant, invisible war against a sea of microbes. This is a side of the pirate life that the legends never mention. It's not about the thrill of the chase or the glory of battle. It's about the quiet, constant fear of a splinter. It's about understanding that your greatest enemy isn't a Spanish galleon or a naval patrol, but a microscopic organism that can be introduced into your body by the slightest scratch. The man with the broken leg is resting in his hammock, his fate uncertain. He might heal or he might develop a fever in a few days. Every man on the crew knows this. And every man, as he goes about his work, is acutely aware that the next jout for the surgeon could be for him. The sailor with the broken leg takes a turn for the worse. A few days after patches set the bone, a fever sets in. The man becomes delirious, muttering nonsense in his hammock. A foul smell begins to emanate from the splintered limb. Patches inspects it, his face grim. He unwraps the canvas bandages, and the sight and smell makes even the most hardened sailors turn away. The leg is swollen, discolored, and clearly overrun with infection. The diagnosis is unspoken, but understood by everyone. Gangrene. There is no more debate, no more waiting. The decision is made by the captain and the quartermaster in consultation with Patches. It's a choice between a man losing his leg and a man losing his life. For the crew, it's a grim but necessary calculus. A one-legged sailor can still be useful on a ship. He can work the sails, stand watch, or help in the galley. A dead sailor is just ballast. The preparations begin, and the mood on the ship becomes heavy and somber. This is the most serious surgery performed at sea, and everyone knows the odds. The procedure will once again take place on the main deck, in the open air. The patient is brought up from the stinking tween deck and laid on a sea chest. He is barely conscious, his eyes glassy with fever. He is given a leather strap to bite down on, to keep from biting off his own tongue. And then the rum. They pour it down his throat until he chokes, not for courage this time, but in a desperate attempt to induce a state of near unconsciousness. Patches lays out his tools on a piece of canvas. The star of the show is the amputation saw, its teeth freshly sharpened. Alongside it are several knives for cutting through the flesh and muscle, and a frightening-looking tool called a tenacium, a sharp hook used for pulling out arteries so they could be tied off. He also has his cauterizing irons heating in the galley's fire, their tips glowing a dull red. The process is a brutal, step-by-step butchery. First, Patches uses a knife to cut a flap of skin below where the amputation will take place. This skin flap is crucial. It will be used to cover the stump later. Then, with a larger knife, he cuts through the muscle and tissue, right down to the bone. The patient, even in his drunken, feverish state, convulses and screams into the leather strap. Several men hold him down, their knuckles white, their faces pale and sweaty. Once the bone is exposed, Patches picks up the saw. The sound is the most horrible part. A wet, grating, rhythmic zrr as the teeth bite into the living bone. It seems to go on forever. Sawdust, mixed with blood and bone marrow, sprays onto the deck. Finally, with a sharp crack, the leg comes free. A crewman immediately grabs the severed limb and, without ceremony, throws it overboard. There is no time for sentiment. The next few moments are a frantic race against time. The patient is bleeding profusely from the severed arteries in the stump. Patches and his assistant use the tenacium hooks to pull out the main arteries and quickly tie them off with silk or gut sutures. This was the most significant advance in amputation technique, pioneered by French surgeon Ambroise in the 16th century. Before this, the only way to stop the bleeding was cauterization. The cauterization still has its place. For the smaller weeping blood vessels, Patches takes the glowing hot irons from the fire. He presses them against the raw stump. The sickening sizzle of flesh searing shut fills the air, along with the smell of burnt meat. This horrifying act, as barbaric as it seems, was effective at stopping bleeding and was also thought to purify the wound. Finally, Patches folds the flap of skin over the stump and stitches it loosely into place, leaving a hole at the bottom for fluids to drain. The entire stump is then slathered in a dressing, often a mixture of tar and dough, teased apart old rope, and tightly bandaged. The patient, who has mercifully passed out, is carried back below deck. His ordeal is over, but his fight for survival has just begun. The stump is now a massive, open wound, highly susceptible to new infections. His fever might break, or it might rage on. The question of survival rates for these procedures is a topic of intense historical speculation. On land, in the best hospitals of the day, the mortality rate for a thigh amputation could be as high as 60-70%. On a filthy pirate ship, with a cook surgeon and no real aftercare, the odds were undoubtedly worse. A successful amputation, where the patient actually survived, was considered a minor miracle. You stand there, the coppery smell of blood and scorched flesh still hanging in the air. The deck is being swabbed down, the tools cleaned. The crew is quiet, each man lost in his own thoughts. You have just witnessed the absolute brutal reality of 18th century medicine. You look out at the endless blue of the ocean, and it feels like a desert. There is no help coming. There is no escape. There is only the ship, the crew, and the grim hope that you never, ever have to lie on that sea chest. As the shock wears off, you notice one of the older sailors smiling, a strange, gap-toothed grin. You wonder what he could possibly be happy about until you see his gums. They are swollen and purple. You discreetly watch the old sailor, the one with the strange smile and the swollen gums. His name is Jebediah, and he's been at sea longer than you've been alive. His smile isn't one of happiness, you realize, but a grimace of discomfort. When he speaks, his teeth seem loose in their sockets, and his breath is overpowering like foul. His gums are not just swollen, they are a dark spongy purple, and they look like they bleed at the slightest touch. You've seen this on a few of the other long-serving men as well. A general sense of profound lethargy, old wounds that refuse to heal properly, and strange, dark splotches on their skin, like old bruises that never fade. You are witnessing the slow, insidious onset of scurvy. Today, we know scurvy is caused by a severe deficiency of vitamin C. But in the 18th century, it was a terrifying and mysterious plague of the sailors. It was the single greatest killer of sailors, responsible for more deaths than naval combat, storms, and all other diseases combined. It was a slow, agonizing process of the body literally falling apart. Vitamin C is essential for the production of collagen, the protein that acts as the glue for the body's tissues. It holds together your skin, your blood vessels, your bones. Without it, the glue dissolves. The first signs are often fatigue and joint pain, easily dismissed as the usual hardships of life at sea. But then the more dramatic symptoms appear. The gums begin to swell and bleed as the capillaries within them break down. Teeth, no longer anchored securely in the softening jawbone, become loose and eventually fall out. This is the scurvy smile you see on Jabedia. The breakdown of blood vessels happens all over the body, leading to the strange bruises on the skin. Internal bleeding can occur. Old, healed wounds can spontaneously reopen as the scar tissue, which is made of collagen, dissolves. The psychological effects are just as devastating, with sufferers experiencing depression, hysteria, and extreme irritability. In its final stages, scurvy leads to jaundice, fever, convulsions, and finally, death from hemorrhage or heart failure. The men on your ship don't know about vitamins. They have 1,000 different theories about what causes scurvy. Others think it's the dampness, or the result of eating too much salted meat. There's a heated debate, with no evidence, about whether it's the stinking water or the hardtack that's to blame. This is one of those historical medical mysteries where the answer seems so obvious to us now, but was completely invisible to them. The link between diet and the disease was suspected by some, but it was hard to prove. The cures they attempt are a collection of folk remedies and misguided medical theories. They might be bled by the surgeon in the belief that they have too much bad blood. They might be given doses of mercury, a toxic heavy metal that was a common treatment for many ailments. The most common prescription was simply rest in fresh air, neither of which did anything to halt the disease's progress. The tragedy is that the cure was often sailing right alongside them. When pirates captured a Spanish ship, they would often find it laden with citrus fruits, lemons, limes, or inches being shipped back to Europe. They would feast on these fruits, and miraculously, the sailors suffering from the strange sickness would begin to recover. Their gums would heal, their energy would return, but they rarely made the connection. They attributed the recovery to the fresh meat they also ate, or the fine wine they drank, or simply the boost in morale from a successful raid. They saw the cure as a happy side effect of plunder, not as a specific nutritional remedy. It wasn't until 1747 that a British naval surgeon named James Lind conducted what is often considered one of the first controlled clinical trials in history. He took 12 sailors suffering from scurvy and divided them into 6 pairs, giving each pair a different supplement to their diet, including cider, vinegar, and, most famously, 2 oranges and a lemon. The pair that received the citrus fruits made a stunningly rapid recovery. Lind published his findings, but the naval bureaucracy was slow to listen. It would be another 50 years before the Royal Navy made lemon or lime juice a mandatory part of a sailor's diet, a move that dramatically reduced deaths from scurvy and arguably gave them a significant advantage over other navies. This simple dietary supplement changed the course of maritime history. But you are a pirate decades before Lind's work is widely accepted. You have no lime juice ration. Your only hope for vitamin C is the random chance of capturing a prized ship with a well-stocked larder. You watch Jabedia hobble across the deck, his body a testament to the slow decay that awaits any man who spends too long at sea. You feel a phantom ache in your own joints Are they a little tender today? Is that just from the hardtack? Or is it the beginning of something more? The fear on a pirate ship changes day by day. Yesterday, it was the surgeon's saw. Today, it's a quiet, internal dread of your own body coming undone. You glance towards the galley, where Patches is preparing the evening meal, and you feel a fresh wave of despair. Your gaze lingers on the galley, that smoky, greasy corner of the ship that serves as the heart of your sustenance, and you're beginning to suspect the source of many of your problems. The man with the broken leg is recovering, but slowly. The amputee is still alive, feverish and weak, his fate hanging by a thread. The shadow of scurvy lengthens with each passing day. And all roads, it seems, led back to the kitchen. You decide to take a closer look at Patches' domain, driven by a morbid curiosity to see where your lumpy, tasteless meals are born. The galley, as you get closer, is an assault on the senses. The primary smell is old, rancid fat. A thick, greasy film coats every surface, a combination of spilled cooking oil, animal fat, and smoke. The brick firebox, the ship's stove, is caked in soot, and the deck around it is stained dark with things you'd rather not identify. This is not a space that has ever seen a thorough cleaning. Patches is working, sweat beading on his brow. HES chopping onions on a thick wooden block that is deeply scored with knife marks. The crevices are black with the grime of 1,000 previous meals. He doesn't wash the onions before chopping them. He doesn't wash his hands. He wipes them on his apron, which is a Pollock-like masterpiece of grease, blood, and old food stains. Your eyes drift to his ingredients. The salted beef is being freshened by being towed behind the ship in a net. This helps to leach out some of the overwhelming salt, but it also means the meat is being dragged through the same water the crew uses as a toilet, collecting whatever flotsam and jetsam the ocean has to offer. When it's brought back on board, it's not rinsed with precious fresh water, it's taken directly to the chopping block. Next to the block is a barrel of flour, which is actually a mix of ground biscuit crumbs and whatever flour is left. You see the telltale black specks of weevils moving through it. Patches doesn't sift them out. As the old sailor said, it's just extra protein. They will be baked right into whatever bread or biscuits HES making, or boiled into the burgoo. Their nutty flavor is standard, if unappetizing, part of the dish. And then there are the chickens. A small coop near the galley houses a few scrawny birds, the ship's emergency supply of fresh meat. They peck at the filthy deck, eating spilled grain and, as you've seen, the weevils from the hardtack. Their droppings are everywhere. When it's time for one to join the stew pot, it is dispatched and plucked right there on the deck, the feathers blowing in the wind, sometimes landing in the open water cask or the food barrels. The concept of cross-contamination is centuries away. The same knife that cuts the chicken might be used to slice the bread. The same board that held the raw meat will be used for chopping vegetables, if there are any. This complete lack of food hygiene was the norm, not the exception. They had no understanding of microbiology, of E. coli or salmonella. Sickness that resulted from eating spoiled or contaminated food was usually just called a gripe of the guts and was attributed to 100 other causes before the food itself was blamed. The connection was rarely made because everyone was eating the same contaminated food. If half the crew came down with diarrhea, they'd blame the bad air, not the cook. This leads to an interesting, if stomach-turning, historical question. How did they survive at all? Were their stomachs simply populated with a hardier microbiome, accustomed to a constant onslaught of bacteria? Did the heavy use of spices like pepper, which had some mild antibacterial properties, help at all, or was the high alcohol grog ration the only thing keeping widespread food poisoning at bay? It's a point of debate among historians and microbiologists. The answer is likely a combination of all three, plus the simple fact that many of them didn't survive. Dysentery, the bloody flux, was a constant and deadly threat. You watch as Patches throws a handful of the weevil-laced flour into his bubbling stew pot to thicken it. He gives it a stir with a large wooden spoon that looks like it's never been properly washed, only licked clean. He tastes the stew, then puts the spoon back in the pot. Your stomach churns. You have to eat this. Every man on the ship has to eat this. It's a miracle the entire crew isn't permanently afflicted with food poisoning. Your tour of the galley has been enlightening, but not encouraging. You've seen the source of the fuel that keeps you alive, and it's a cesspool of casual filth. Every meal is a roll of the dice, a gamble with your digestive system. As you turn to leave, you see a sailor walk to the side of the ship with a bucket full of kitchen scraps, vegetable peelings, bones, and other waste. You wonder what the protocol is for garbage disposal. You are about to find out it's as simple and unhygienic as everything else on this ship. The sailor with the bucket of kitchen scraps doesn't hesitate. He doesn't look for a designated disposal area or a special container. He just walks to the rail, leans over, and with a flick of his wrists, tips the entire contents of the bucket into the sea. Bones, onion peels, and fish guts splash into the water and are quickly swallowed by the ship's wake. This is it. This is the ship's waste management system. It's simple, efficient, and profoundly short-sighted. Everything goes overboard. Not just kitchen scraps, but all the refuse of daily life. The clumps of hair from your recent shave overboard. The tattered remains of a shirt that has finally disintegrated overboard. The contents of the chamber pots used by the captain or any sick men confined to their hammocks overboard. The ship is a tiny, self-contained island of humanity, leaving a constant, drifting trail of its own garbage across the vast, empty ocean. In the short term, it makes a certain kind of sense. The ocean is huge, seemingly infinite. Tossing a few bones into it feels like nothing, but the cumulative effect is significant. The ship is constantly followed by a retinue of opportunistic life. A cloud of seabirds circles overhead day and night, their sharp eyes watching for any morsel tossed from the galley. And below the surface, the sharks follow. Sailors have always had a complex relationship with sharks. They are objects of fear and fascination. They are also a constant, menacing presence, drawn to the floating buffet that is a sailing ship. The crew knows that any man who falls overboard has only a few minutes, at best, before the ship's silent, grace-kind followers arrive. The act of throwing garbage overboard is, in effect, sea humming the waters, ensuring that the sharks never stray too far. It's a grim, self-fulfilling prophecy. This practice wasn't just limited to pirates. For centuries, the sea was treated as the world's garbage dump. Naval vessels, merchant ships, passenger liners, they all did the same thing. The idea of ocean pollution as we understand it today simply did not exist. The ocean's capacity to absorb and dilute waste was considered limitless. They had no concept of plastics, of persistent chemical pollutants, or of the delicate nature of marine ecosystems. Out of sight, out of mind. But there was a more immediate, tangible consequence of this system. The ship itself was never truly clean. While major, obvious waste went overboard, smaller bits and pieces did not. The deck was a constant litter of dropped food, spilled drink, tobacco spit, and other detritus. The scuppers, the drains along the edge of the deck designed to let seawater wash off, were constantly clogged with filth. And all of this organic matter would rot in the sun and drain, contributing to the ship's unique and overwhelming bouquet. It also attracted pests. The rats, your constant, furry companions, thrived on this carelessness. A dropped piece of biscuit, a smear of grease, it was a feast for them. The ship's rat population was in direct proportion to the crew's sloppiness. And the rats, as you know, were not just an annoyance. They were vectors for disease, carrying fleas that could transmit bubonic plague, and contaminating the food stores with their droppings. Historians studying the logistics of life at sea often point to this casual approach to waste as a key factor in the high rates of disease and mortality. It's a classic example of a tragedy of the commons on a micro scale. The shared space of the ship was degraded by the individual actions of the crew, with consequences for everyone. Was there any attempt at organized cleaning? Yes, but it was a battle they were destined to lose, a process of scrubbing them with large sandstone blocks. But a pirate crew, with its more relaxed approach to discipline, was less likely to engage in such back-breaking, routine labor unless absolutely necessary. A basic swabbing of the deck was more common, but this often just pushed the filth around rather than removing it. You watch the last of the garbage disappear into the blue-green water. A gull swoops down, grabs a floating piece of gristle, and flies off, screeching in triumph. It's a perfect, self-contained little ecosystem, you think. The crew eats the food, the leftovers are thrown to the sea. The sharks and birds eat the leftovers, and the sharks, in turn, wait to eat the crew. There's a certain grim poetry to it. You look up at the sails full of wind, and the complex web of rigging that holds them in place. The whole ship is a living, breathing, eating, and excreting organism, and you are just one small part of its messy, smelly metabolism. You take a deep breath, and for the first time, you try to dissect the smell to understand its component parts, as if by naming them you can conquer them. You close your eyes and inhale, not with disgust this time, but with a kind of analytical curiosity. You try to unravel the complex tapestry of scent that you've been swimming in since you first stepped on board. It's no longer just a wall of bad smell, it's a language, and you're beginning to learn the vocabulary. The top note, the most assertive and inescapable, is tar. It's the smell of survival. It's in the rigging that your hands grasp every day, the thick, black ropes that control the sails. The process of tarring the rigging was a constant, necessary chore. Sailors would heat pine tar in a large pot and painstakingly apply it to every inch of rope to protect it from the corrosive effects of salt and water. The hot, pungent, almost medicinal smell would hang over the ship for days. It gets on your hands, under your fingernails, on your clothes. You realize you haven't felt truly unsticky in weeks. This tar is the ship's perfume, its signature scent. Beneath the tar is the smell of the sea itself, but not the clean, fresh smell you might imagine. It's the smell of dampness, a deep, persistent, musty odor that comes from wood that is never truly dry. It's the smell of the bilge, that dark, inaccessible space at the very bottom of the ship. The bilge is the ship's sump. It collects everything that leaks seawater seeping through the hull, spilled grog, rainwater, and all manner of unspeakable fluids. It's a stagnant, stinking primordial soup, and its foul breath constantly rises through the floorboards, a ghostly reminder of the decay below. Periodically, the crew has to pump the bilge, a truly nauseating task that brings the worst of the ship's smells up into the open air. Then comes the human element, the smell you've come to associate with your new life. It's the sour, sharp tang of unwashed bodies, a smell that intensifies in the heat of the day and becomes almost suffocating in the close confines of the 'tween deck at night. It's the smell of 50 men's sweat, fear, and exertion, soaked into their woolen clothes and the very wood of the ship. Mingling with this is the smell of their habits, the sweet, cloying scent of cheap, strong tobacco, smoked in clay pipes, the smoke staining the sails and the low beams of the ceiling, and the ever-present ghost of rum spilled on the deck, on clothes, on the breath of every man around you. It's a boozy, fermented undertone to the whole olfactory experience. And, of course, there's the kitchen, the rancid fat, the boiling salt meat, the occasional whiff of something actively rotting. These smells drift across the deck in waves, dictated by the wind and what Patches has decided to cook that day. You open your eyes. You've become accustomed to it. This is a well-documented phenomenon known as olfactory fatigue, or nose blindness. Your brain, overwhelmed by a constant stimulus, simply decides to stop registering it with the same intensity. The smell hasn't gone away, your perception of it has changed. It's become the new normal, the baseline against which all other smells are measured. A captured ship, with its cargo of spices or coffee, would smell like paradise. A visit to a port town, with its earthly smells of soil, bakeries, and livestock, would be a dizzying, overwhelming experience after months at sea. This shared scent was a powerful, if unspoken, part of the crew's identity. It set them apart. When they swaggered into a port town, people could literally smell them coming. It was the mark of their profession, the aroma of the sea. It's a detail that often gets lost in the romanticized versions of piracy, the sheer, unadulterated stink of them. Historians have sometimes debated whether people in the past were simply less sensitive to smells than we are today. The world before modern sanitation was a much smellier place in general. Cities were filled with the stench of open sewers, animal waste, and rotting garbage. Perhaps a pirate ship was only marginally worse than the slum he grew up in. It's a difficult question to answer, as sensory experience is one of the hardest things to reconstruct from the historical record. But the sheer volume of commentary in letters and journals from the period about the foul air and stinking me as mess of ships suggests that even by their standards, it was pretty bad. You watch as a sailor, his hair long and matted, tries to tie it back with a piece of string. It's a losing battle. The wind whips strands of greasy hair across his face. It's getting long enough to be a nuisance, long enough to be a prime breeding ground for the lice you so recently evicted from your own head. The question of personal grooming, of how to manage hair and beards in this environment, seems like the next logical problem to solve. You watch the sailor struggle with his wind-whipped hair and you're suddenly grateful for your own smooth, bald scalp. Managing hair in this environment is a constant, irritating chore. For those who choose to keep it, it becomes a greasy, salt-caked, tangled mess, a perfect nest for lice and a magnet for every stray bit of turned food. So what are the options? As you've already discovered, the most practical solution is to get rid of it. The ship's designated barber is usually just another sailor who is reasonably steady with a razor. He'll offer a rough, no-frill shave, using a sharp blade and a bit of seawater. No hot lather, no comforting aftershave balm, just the cold, unforgiving scrape of steel on skin. Many of the veteran sailors you see are either completely bald or sport a mohawk style, not for fashion, but because it was easier to shave the sides of your own head than the very top. This hairstyle, so often associated with punk rock, had a deeply practical origin in various cultures, including, it seems, the ad hoc culture of sailors. Beards are another story. They present a similar hygiene challenge, a fantastic home for lice and a great place to store remnants of your last meal. Yet many sailors kept them. A beard could offer some protection from the sun and wind, and for many men, it was a symbol of masculinity and pride. But it required maintenance. Combing the beard was a daily ritual for those who kept them. They used fine-toothed combs, often carved from bone or wood, to painstakingly work through the tangles and, more importantly, to scrape out the lice in their eggs, known as nits. It was a slow, meticulous process. Sometimes, to make the job easier and to deal with a particularly bad infestation, they would rub their beards with a kind of foul-smelling grease or pomade, which would help to suffocate the lice and make them easier to comb out. The alternative to the comb was fire. In a truly desperate move, a sailor might quickly pass a candle flame or a burning piece of rope under his beard to singe off the parasites. This was, obviously, an incredibly risky maneuver, a testament to just how maddening the itching could be. One wrong move and you could set your entire face ablaze. It's a choice between a potential third-degree burn and the certainty of a louse-infested beard. The style of these beards was dictated by practicality. Many were braided. Braiding a long beard kept it from getting tangled in the rigging, a serious and potentially fatal hazard, and also made it somewhat easier to clean. Sometimes, you see sailors with beads or small metal rings woven into their beards. While this might seem decorative, it could also have had a practical purpose, adding weight to the braids to keep them from flying about in the wind. The famous image of the pirate Blackbird, with smoking fuses woven into his massive black beard, was pure psychological warfare, a terrifying piece of personal branding designed to make him look like a demon from hell. For the average pirate, however, beard accessories were likely more about control than intimidation. There's a historical debate about the accuracy of the ubiquitous pirate ponytail. While it's a staple in movies, the reality is more nuanced. Long hair was generally a liability on a sailing ship. It could get caught in machinery or rigging. The British Royal Navy actually had regulations requiring sailors to keep their hair either short or neatly tied in a queue, which was often tarred to keep it in a solid, lice-resistant club. Pirates, being rebels against naval discipline, would have had no such regulations. An individual pirate's hairstyle was likely a matter of personal choice, weighing the hassle and hygiene risks against his own vanity or laziness. You see a sailor sitting on a barrel, carefully sharpening his knife. He then proceeds to give himself a trim, using the reflection in a puddle of seawater on the deck as a crude mirror. HES not aiming for a stylish look. HES just trying to keep his beard out of his mouth and his hair out of his eyes. It's pure, functional grooming. This whole world, you reflect, is about stripping life down to its bare essentials. You don't wash for pleasure. You rinse with salt water for basic function. You don't style your hair. You shave it off to prevent infestation. You don't savor your food. You choke it down for fuel. Every action is dictated by the harsh logic of survival at sea. It's a life devoid of softness, of comfort, of the small pleasant rituals that make life on land bearable. Suddenly, a cry comes from the lookout perched high above in the crow's nest. Sail ho! The words send a jolt of electricity through the ship. The languid mood of the afternoon is shattered. Every man is on his feet, his eyes scanning the horizon. The boredom is over. After weeks of empty ocean, there is finally a target, and with the target comes the possibility of plunder, of fresh food, of clean clothes, and of a brief, chaotic escape from this floating prison. The ship turns, the sails are trimmed, and the chase begins. The chase lasts for the better part of a day. The distant sail resolves into a fat, slow-moving merchant vessel, low in the water, a sign that its hold is full. The mood on your ship is electric, a strange mix of predatory excitement and nervous energy. This is the moment everything has been building towards. The boredom, the filth, the bad food, it can all be washed away by a successful capture. When your ship, the faster and more agile of the two, finally closes the distance, the fight is surprisingly short. A single well-aimed cannon shot across the merchantman's bow is enough. The other captain, seeing he is outgunned and outmaneuvered, wisely strikes his colors, lowering his flag in surrender. The prize is taken with barely a drop of blood spilled. As your crew swarms aboard the captured vessel, the first thing that hits you is the smell, or rather, the lack of it. The merchant ship smells clean. It smells of its cargo, tobacco and coffee, and of fresh paint. The deck is orderly. The crew, now prisoners, are pale-faced and terrified, but they look washed. Their clothes are patched but relatively clean. It's like stepping into another world. The second thing you notice is the food. The pirates make a beeline for the galley and the food stores. They emerge with treasures more valuable than gold sacks of fresh potatoes, strings of onions, a cage of live pigs, and, most gloriously, several crates of oranges. The men fall upon the fruit like starving wolves, tearing at the peels with their teeth, the sweet juice running down their chins and into their filthy beards. They eat one, then another, a desperate, instinctive craving for the vitamin C their bodies have been screaming for. And then comes the rum. The merchant ship has its own supply, and it's of a much higher quality than the kill devil you've been drinking. The barrels are broached, and the celebration begins. It's a wild, chaotic release of pent-up energy and frustration. For the next few days, you don't return to your own ship. The two vessels sail together while the pirates plunder the prize, but the real plunder isn't just the cargo. It's the chance for a brief, glorious return to civilization, pirate style. The crew feasts. Patches, the cook, is in his element, roasting a whole pig on a makeshift spit, boiling potatoes, and creating a salmagnudi that, for the first time, tastes like actual food. But the real party happens when you finally guide your prize into a friendly port. Not a respectable colonial harbor, but a place like Tortuga or a hidden cove in Madagascar, a pirate haven. These were the notorious free ports, towns that openly welcomed pirates, offering a place to sell their stolen goods, repair their ships, and spend their money with no questions asked. Stepping onto solid ground for the first time in months is a disorienting experience. The world seems to tilt and sway, your sea legs still accustomed to the constant motion of the ship. The town is a chaotic, ramshackle collection of taverns, brothels, and merchants' stalls, all catering to the whims of men with sudden, disposable income and a powerful thirst for distraction. The hygiene standards here are not much better than on the ship. The streets are muddy, the taverns are dirty, but it's a different kind of dirty. It's the dirt of the land, and there are opportunities here that the sea does not provide. For a few coins, you can get a hot bath in a wooden tub with actual soap. You can buy a new shirt, one that isn't stiff with tar and sweat. You can eat a meal that wasn't cooked by Patches. You and your shipmates, flush with your shares of the plunder, descend upon the town like a conquering army. The release is explosive. The weeks of discipline, boredom, and deprivation are washed away in a torrent of rum, gambling, and loud, boisterous celebration. It's a period of intense, almost manic hedonism. This is the party that the legends are built on, but it's also a deeply unhealthy environment. The same lack of sanitation and hygiene prevails. Diseases, particularly venereal diseases, are rampant in these port towns. A few days of careless celebration could result in an infection that a pirate would carry for the rest of his short life, with treatments that were often more dangerous than the disease itself. Mercury was a common and toxic remedy for syphilis. Historians debate the social structure of these pirate havens. Were they truly utopian communities of freedom, as some romantic interpretations suggest, or were they just squalid, dangerous dens of vice, ruled by the simple law of supply and demand? The reality was likely somewhere in between. For a week, you live like a king, a dirty, drunken king in a chaotic, muddy kingdom. But the money runs out fast. Your share of the prize, which seemed like a fortune, dwindles away on overpriced rum and bad bets. Soon you're broke again. Your new shirt is already stained. The fleeting feeling of being clean is a distant memory. And you, along with the rest of the crew, find yourselves drifting back towards the ship, the only real home you have. The party is over. It's time to go back to work, and as you prepare to set sail again, you overhear two sailors discussing a toothbrush and the strange remedy one of them swears by. As the crew slowly trickles back to the ship, their pockets empty and their heads throbbing, the familiar rhythms of sea life begin to reassert themselves. The brief, glorious interlude of fresh food and relative comfort is over. The future holds only the familiar prospect of hardtack and weeks of open ocean. It's in this lull, as the ship is being re-provisioned with barrels of slimy water and salted meat, that you overhear the conversation. A young sailor, new to the life like you, is complaining of a toothache, the same miserable affliction you endured weeks ago. He is terrified of facing the carpenter's pliers. An older sailor, a weary man with more tattoos than teeth, scoffs at his fear. "No need for that, lad," he rasps, pulling a small, grimy pouch from his belt. "Got the cure right here." He pulls out a wad of dried, brownish leaves. It's tobacco, but he doesn't put it in a pipe. He takes a small pinch, rolls it into a tight, hard pellet, and hands it to the young sailor. "Shove that in the hole," he instructs. "Pack it in tight. The pain'll go right away." The young sailor looks skeptical but desperate. He takes the tobacco pellet and carefully pushes it into the cavity of his aching tooth. His face contorts for a moment, and then a look of slow, dawning relief spreads across his features. It's working, he mutters in disbelief. You've just witnessed one of the most common and enduring folk remedies of the age. Tobacco was seen as a panacea for toothaches. They believed it had powerful numbing and healing properties, and, in a limited way, they weren't entirely wrong. Nicotine is a vasoxantic, meaning it can temporarily reduce blood flow to an area, which might slightly decrease the inflammation and pressure causing the pain. The wad of tobacco also acts as a physical barrier, keeping air and food particles out of the sensitive, exposed nerve. It's not a cure, but it's a surprisingly effective temporary fix. This is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the strange and sometimes stomach-turning folk medicine practiced on board. The ship is a floating repository of superstition, half-truths, and remedies passed down through generations of sailors. Lacking access to professional medical care, they developed their own pharmacy, cobbled together from the natural world and a healthy dose of wishful thinking. You start to pay more attention, collecting these scraps of medical lore. You're told that for a persistent cough, the best thing is a syrup made from rum, tar water that had been steeped with pine tar, and onions. The concoction sounds vile, but the sailors swear by it. The alcohol would act as a cough suppressant, and the onions and tar have mild antiseptic qualities. For burns, a common injury from the galley fire or handling cannons, they don't use cool water. Instead, they might apply a poultice of chewed bread or, in some cases, a smear of the patient's own earwax. The logic behind the earwax cure is a mystery, one of those bizarre historical practices that leaves modern scholars scratching their heads. Was it simply a belief that something from your own body couldn't harm you, or did the waxy substance provide a barrier the wires lost to time to stop bleeding from a cut? You've already seen the spider web cure. But you also hear of another method applying a mixture of soot from the chimney and urine. The soot, being a fine powder, might have helped with clotting, but the urine, well, while sterile when it leaves the body, it's not exactly a modern antiseptic. Yet, the belief in urine therapy was surprisingly widespread for various ailments. A headache, the cure might be to tie a rope tightly around the head, the pressure thought to drive the pain away, or to wear a necklace of dried sea beans drift seeds that wash ashore, believed to have protective properties. These remedies highlight a world steeped in magical thinking. The line between medicine and magic was blurry, almost non-existent. They didn't understand the germ theory of disease, so they created their own explanations. An illness might be caused by a curse, the evil eye, or a disturbance in the body's humors. Therefore, the cure had to address these supernatural or elemental causes. It's a subject that medical historians are constantly exploring, trying to understand the worldview that made these strange cures seem logical. As you listen to these snippets of advice, you realize that the ship's medical knowledge is a chaotic mix. There's the brutal, practical butchery of the surgeon's saw, the genuine if accidental effectiveness of citrus for scurvy, and this third category of bizarre, superstitious folk remedies. A sailor's health depended on which of these three philosophies was applied to his particular ailment. Would he get the saw, the orange, or the earwax? It was all a matter of luck. The young sailor with the tobacco in his tooth is smiling now, relieved. But you know his relief is temporary. The tobacco is just masking the problem. The decay is still there, eating away at the tooth. Sooner or later, he'll be visiting the carpenter after all. A few weeks after leaving the pirate haven, the brief memory of cleanliness and full bellies has faded completely. Your clothes, including the new shirts you bought in port, are once again stiff with salt and grime. The familiar, low-grade misery has set in. It's during a period of stifling, humid calm that a few of the men decide to take action. This, they declare, is laundry day. The announcement is met with groans, not cheers. Laundry day on a pirate ship is not a pleasant chore. It's a back-breaking, deeply unsatisfying process that often seems to make things worse. You, however, are morbidly curious. Your own clothes have reached a level of filth that is starting to offend even your dulled senses. You decide to participate. There are two primary methods, and you get to witness both. The first is the keel hauling method, not for men, but for clothes. A sailor takes his bundle of dirty laundry, a shirt and a pair of breeches, and ties it securely to the end of a long rope. He then tosses the bundle overboard and lets it drag in the ship's wake for several hours. The theory is that the constant motion of the water being forced through the fabric will scrub it clean. It's a beautifully simple, low-effort idea. But the reality is less than ideal. The sheer force of the water can be incredibly harsh on the clothes, ripping seams and wearing the fabric thin. If the rope isn't tied properly, your entire wardrobe could be lost to the depths. More importantly, as you've already established, you are washing your clothes in seawater. You watch as the sailor hauls his laundry back on board. It is, admittedly, cleaner. The surface, dirt and grime have been blasted away, but the clothes are now completely saturated with salt water. He wrings them out as best he can, his hands red with the effort, and then hangs them on a line strung between two masts. There they will hang for days, slowly drying in the humid air. When they are finally dry, they will be stiff as a board, the fabric infused with abrasive salt crystals that will chafe his skin raw. He has exchanged the soft filth of sweat and grease for the sharp, irritating filth of salt. It's a terrible trade-off. The second method is for more delicate items or for when the ship is moving too slowly. This is the bucket method. A few buckets of seawater are hauled on deck. There is no soap, of course. The sailors simply stomp on their clothes in the buckets, like they are crushing grapes. It's a communal, splashy affair. Then, they wring them out and hang them to dry. The result is the same stiff, salty, chafing garments. Some historians have found records of sailors trying to use soapwort, a plant whose roots and leaves can be agitated in water to create a lather, if they were lucky enough to find some on a remote island. But, for the most part, soap was not part of the equation. Why bother at all if the result unpleasant? Why not just wear the clothes until they fall apart? The primary reason is the same one that drives so many of the hygiene rituals on board the War Against Lice. A thorough, violent dousing in salt water, followed by several days of drying in the hot sun, could be effective at killing a significant portion of the louse population and their eggs hiding in the seams of the clothing. It was a choice between the constant, maddening itch of parasites and the abrasive chafe of salt-cured clothes. Most men at some point would choose the chafe. You decide to try it. You tie your shirt to a rope and toss it overboard. For an hour, you watch it dance and tumble in the ship's wake. When you pull it in, it feels heavy and strangely alien. You wring it out, the salt water dripping down your arms, and hang it up. For the next 2 days, you are shirtless, your skin exposed to the sun and wind. You feel strangely vulnerable, but also a little bit freer. When the shirt is finally dry, you put it on. The fabric is stiff and scratchy, just as you feared. It feels like wearing a shirt made of fine-grained sandpaper. Every movement is a minor abrasion. You have solved one problem only to create another. This endless cycle of making do, of choosing the lesser of two evils, is the defining characteristic of this life. You choose the carpenter's pliers over the agony of an abscess. You choose weevils over starvation. You choose a bucket of salt water over a body coated in sweat. You choose chafing over itching. There are no good options, only a series of slightly less terrible ones. As you stand there, uncomfortably adjusting your stiff, salty shirt, you feel a familiar movement under your feet. It's the faint but unmistakable scuttling of the ship's other, more numerous crew, the rats. And a dark thought crosses your mind, a question that has likely occurred to every hungry sailor staring into an empty barrel of biscuits. The rats are a constant presence, a living, breathing part of the ship's ecosystem. You hear them at night, their tiny claws skittering across the wood in the darkness of the 'tween deck. You see them in the day, bold and sleek, darting from the shadows of the cargo hold to snatch a dropped crumb. They are your roommates, your competitors for food, and the silent witnesses to every moment of your life on this vessel. Your relationship with them is complicated. Mostly, they are a nuisance and a threat. They are a symbol of the ship's filth, thriving in the very conditions that make your own life so miserable. They are notorious for getting into the food stores, no matter how well sealed the barrels are. Their sharp teeth can gnaw through wood, leather, and canvas. A crew might open a barrel of what they thought was preserved biscuit, only to find it has been hollowed out and turned into a rat's nest, the remaining food fouled with droppings and urine. This contamination is not just disgusting, it's dangerous. Rats are infamous carriers of disease. Their fleas can carry the bubonic plague, the Black Death, and their urine can transmit leptopsosis, a nasty bacterial infection that can cause fever, organ failure, and death. Every sailor knew that a ship with a large rat population was an unhealthy ship. Crews waged a constant, low-grade war against them. They might have a ship's cat, a working animal prized not for its companionship, but for its mousing skills. A good mouser was a valuable member of the crew. Some sailors also had terriers, dogs bred specifically for rat catching, who would hunt them in the hold with a ferocious tenacity. But these measures could only control the population, never eradicate it. The rats were too numerous, too cunning, and had too many places to hide. But then there's the dark thought, the one that surfaces during the lean times when the prize ships are scarce and the rations are running low. You look at the rats fat, well-fed, and numerous, and you look at your own dwindling supply of salty, weevil-infested food. The question becomes inevitable: are they just pests, or are they also a source of protein? The answer, for many desperate sailors throughout history, was yes. Eating rats was not a first choice, or even a 10th choice. When faced with starvation, a rat, properly skinned and cooked, was a source of meat. This grim reality is a recurring theme in historical accounts of long voyages and sieges. Shipwrecked sailors, marooned pirates, and crews on becalmed ships have all resorted to eating the very vermin they once cursed. The practice is a subject of some debate among pirate historians. Was it a common occurrence or a last resort scenario? The consensus leans towards the latter. A pirate ship, with its boom and bust cycle of plunder, was less likely to face the kind of prolonged, months-long starvation that a naval or exploration vessel might. The goal of piracy was to make short, profitable voyages, not to cross the Pacific. However, if a ship was damaged in a storm, lost its way, or simply had a long string of bad luck, the food stores could dwindle to nothing. In that situation, every living thing on board, from the chickens to the cats to the rats, would suddenly find itself on the menu. They were typically cooked in a stew. The burgoo or salmagnuti were their stringy, gaomai meat could be disguised by heavy spices and other ingredients. Some accounts describe them as being as good as squirrel, while others are less complimentary. The taste likely depended heavily on the rat's own diet. A rat that had been feasting on spilled rum and sugar might be more palatable than one that had been subsisting on bilge water and rotten wood. You watch one scurry along a beam overhead, its long, naked tail dangling for a moment before it disappears. The idea is repulsive. It feels like a line you hope you never have to cross, the ultimate admission of defeat. It's one thing to live with filth and pests, it's another thing entirely to eat them. This forces you to reevaluate your place in the ship's food chain. You are a predator of merchant ships, but on your own vessel, you are in a delicate balance. You eat the ship's rations, the rats eat the ship's rations, and in a worst-case scenario, you eat the rats. It's a closed, brutal, and deeply unsanitary loop. As you lie in your hammock that night, the familiar sea's incus from the ship's gentle rocking begins to churn in your stomach. As a newcomer to the sea, it's a feeling you still haven't quite managed to shake. The gentle, relentless rocking of the ship is a feeling you still haven't grown accustomed to. For the veteran sailors, it's as natural as breathing. Their bodies have long since adapted their inner ears making peace with the constant motion. But for you, it's a persistent, low-grade misery. Some days are fine, but on others, a particular swell or a change in the seas, rhythm will bring back that familiar, queasy lurch in your stomach. It's the greenhorn's curse, the landsman's plague. It's also a deeply undignified affliction. While your shipmates are scampering up the rigging, you might be found leaning discreetly over the rail, contributing your meager rations back to the ocean. The feeling is dreadful: a cold sweat, a churning stomach, a wave of nausea that blots out all other thoughts. Your suffering does not go unnoticed. It's a source of mild amusement for the old hands who have seen it all before. And everyone, it seems, has a piece of advice for you. You are inundated with a flood of surefire cures, a collection of folk wisdom and pure quackery that has been passed down through generations of sailors. Stand in the middle of the ship, one sailor advises you earnestly. It's the point of balance, moves the least. You try it, positioning yourself carefully on the center line of the deck. You're not sure if it helps, or if you just feel silly standing there like a statue. Keep your eyes on the horizon, says another. Don't look at the waves or the deck. Let your eyes tell your brain that you're stable. This is actually one of the few pieces of advice with some scientific basis. The conflict between what your eyes see a stable horizon and what your inner ear feels motion is a key part of what causes motion sickness. Focusing on the horizon can help to resolve that conflict. But then the advice gets stranger. Silas, the only true cure is to drink a cup of seawater. Fights fire with fire, he grunts. Gets it all out of you. Then you're right as rain. You look at the murky, polluted water alongside the ship and politely decline. The idea of deliberately drinking that is more nauseating than the sea's incus itself. This cure was likely just a way to induce vomiting quickly, on the theory that getting it over with was better than suffering for hours. Another sailor suggests you swallow small pieces of salted pork, tied to a string, and then pull them back up again. The logic for this particular piece of gastrointestinal acrobatics is completely lost on you, and it sounds more like a form of self-torture than a cure. And then there's the psychological approach. Just stop thinking about it, a man tells you, as if it's that simple. The more you worry, the sicker you get. It's all in your head. While there is a psychological component, his dismissive tone is less than helpful when your stomach is trying to climb up your throat. The ship's cook, Patches, offers you a piece of hardtack that has been soaked in vinegar. The sharp acidic taste is supposed to settle the stomach. You nibble on it cautiously. It's certainly a powerful flavor, a shock to the system, but it does little to calm the internal storm. Historians find these folk remedies for seas incus fascinating because they exist in a gray area between medicine and old wives' tales. They show how people, in the absence of a scientific understanding of a problem, will create their own solutions through trial and error, observation, and pure superstition. The debate over whether any of these non-standard cures had a placebo effect or some other unknown benefit continues. For every sailor who swore by a particular cure, there was another who would claim it was useless. The only thing that seems to truly help is time. As the days and weeks wear on, your body slowly, grudgingly, begins to adapt. The bouts of nausea become less frequent, less severe. You are developing your sea legs. You are no longer a landsman pretending to be a sailor, you are becoming one. The process is one of slow, miserable acclimation. You realize that this adaptation is a metaphor for your entire experience. You came aboard this ship clean, healthy, and accustomed to the comforts of land. You have been systematically stripped of all of it. You've been made sick, you've been starved, you've been infested with lice, and you've been forced to endure a level of filth you couldn't have imagined. And through it all, you are, somehow, adapting. You are becoming harder, rougher, more resilient. You are being broken down and rebuilt into something new. You begin to wonder about the long-term effects of this transformation. What is the ultimate price of this life? The transformation is undeniable. You catch your reflection one day in a bucket of still water, and for a moment, you don't recognize the person staring back. Your face is leaner, tended deep, leathery brown by the sun and wind. There are new lines etched around your eyes from squinting at the horizon. Your shaved head is starting to grow out into a rough stubble. You look harder. You look harder. This life, you realize, exacts a heavy toll, one that goes far beyond the immediate discomforts of filth and bad food. It's a slow grinding down of the body and the spirit. You look at the older men on the crew, the veterans like Silas and Judea, and you see a preview of your own future, should you be lucky or unlucky enough to survive that long. Their bodies are maps of hardship. Their hands are gnarled and arthritic from years of hauling on wet ropes in the cold. Their backs are permanently stooped from a lifetime of bending, unlifting in cramped spaces. Many have a persistent, hacking cough ship's catter from the constant dampness and the foul air below deck. Their hearing is often poor, damaged by the percussive roar of cannon fire, and their teeth, or lack thereof, tell a story of scurvy and brutal dentistry. A mouthful of healthy teeth is a rarity. Most are missing several, and the ones that remain are often worn down, stained, or loose. This makes eating the already difficult food an even greater challenge, leading to a cycle of malnutrition and further health decline. The constant, low-grade infections leave their mark. Old wounds ache in the damp weather. Scars from cuts, burns, and poorly healed fractures crisscross their skin. Many walk with a limp or have a limited range of motion in a shoulder or an elbow, permanent reminders of an old injury that never quite healed right. The man who had his leg amputated is recovering, now a permanent member of the ship's disabled community, learning to navigate the rolling deck on a crude wooden peg leg. He is a living embodiment of the ultimate physical price of this life. This physical deterioration is a subject of ongoing study for bioarchaeologists who examine the skeletal remains of sailors from this period. The bones tell a clear story of immense physical stress, repetitive strain injuries, poor nutrition, and violence. They are the hard data that backs up the anecdotal evidence from journals and logs. But the toll isn't just physical. The mental and emotional costs are just as high, though harder to see. You've experienced the cycle yourself, long stretches of mind-numbing boredom punctuated by moments of extreme, life-threatening violence and terror. This emotional whiplash is draining. You see it in the men's eyes. A certain hollowness, a guardedness that never quite goes away. The reliance on alcohol as a coping mechanism is universal. The daily grog ration is a comfort, but it's also a form of self-medication that leads to chronic dependency. The explosive hedonistic releases in port are a way to blow off steam, but they offer no lasting peace, only a temporary escape that often leaves the men broken sick. Is there evidence of what we would now call post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, among pirates? It's a question historians and psychologists have begun to explore, a concept known as retrospective diagnosis. While it's impossible to know for sure, the conditions were certainly ripe for it. Witnessing extreme violence, constantly living under the threat of death, and surviving traumatic injuries would have left deep psychological scars. The nightmares, the irritability, the emotional numbness, all classic symptoms of trauma, were likely common, even if they were just dismissed at the time as a sailor being melancholy or ill-tempered. You look at your own hands, calloused and scarred. You think about the things you've seen and done, the person you were and the person you are becoming. You've traded one kind of prison for another. You escaped the rigid hierarchy and brutal discipline of the Navy or the crushing poverty of life on land, but you've exchanged it for a different cage, a floating, filthy, dangerous cage. You came seeking freedom and fortune. You found a life of constant hardship, where the greatest treasure is a fresh orange and the greatest freedom is a brief, drunken shore leave. You've survived so far. You've adapted. You've adapted. You've become one of them. But as you look out at the endless, indifferent ocean, you can't help but wonder if the price of this survival is simply too high. Was the romantic legend of the pirate just a story they told themselves to make the grim reality bearable? You stand on the deck, feeling the familiar, abrasive chafe of your salt-stiffened shirt. The ship is your world, a microcosm of struggle and survival. And you've come to understand that the greatest myth about the pirate life isn't the treasure, it's the idea, the freedom. It's a different kind of servitude, where your masters are hunger, filth, and the indifferent sea. One afternoon, the lookout's cry echoes from the masthead again. Another sail on the horizon. As you close in, the captain gives an order. It's time to show your colors. But you don't raise the flag of any nation. A man brings out a black flag. As it's hoisted up the mast, it unfurls in the wind. A stark, terrifying image against the blue sky, the white skull above to crossed bones. This is the pirate brand. Its purpose is not patriotism or identity, its purpose is commerce. It's a tool of psychological warfare, a piece of marketing designed to maximize profit by minimizing risk. The message of the flag is simple and brutal: surrender now, and you may live. Fight us, and we will show no mercy. A crew that surrendered without a fight was often treated relatively well, their ship plundered and then sent on its way. A crew that resisted would face the full, bloody-minded violence of desperate men. The flag was an advertisement for a peaceful, if unprofitable, transaction. The origin of the name Jolly Roger is one of those things historians still love to argue about. Some think it's a corruption of the French Joli Rouge, pretty red, referring to the solid red flags that some pirates flew to signal that no quarter would be given. Others suggest it comes from Old Roger, a common nickname for the devil. Whatever its origin, the symbol was potent, and it was personal. Different captains had their own logos. Calico Jack Rackham's flag had a skull over to crossed cutlasses. Bartholomew Roberts had a flag depicting him standing on two skulls. One labeled A.B.H.A. Barbadian's head and the other I.M. H.A. Martini Kean's head, a direct insult to the governors of the islands who opposed him. Blackbeard's apocryphal flag showed a skeleton demon spearing a bleeding heart. They were statements of intent, carefully crafted to build a reputation and inspire terror. And here lies the greatest irony. You look at this symbol of death and fear, and you think about the future. You have a strange premonition that one day, this grim logo will be a cartoon. It will be printed on lunkbacks and children's party napkins. The peg leg, a symbol of a brutal amputation and a life of pain, will become a charming affectation for a character in a storybook. The parrot, likely a noisy, messy creature caught in some tropical port, will become a witty, treasure-guarding sidekick. The entire miserable, stinking reality of your life will be sanitized, romanticized, and turned into entertainment. Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island and the countless books and films that will follow will create a myth so powerful it will completely eclipse the truth. They will invent the treasure map, the X that marks the spot. You laugh a bitter, silent laugh. Treasure isn't buried. It's spent. It's the rum you drank last week, the new shirt that's already filthy. The new shirt that's already filthy. The fleeting moments of oblivion you bought in that squalid port town. The real treasure was perishable. Did the men around you buy into their own legend? Did they see themselves as the romantic rebels they would one day be portrayed? As fighting for some grand ideal of maritime democracy? That's another question for the historians. From what you've seen, the talk is not of ideology, but of survival. They talk about the next prize, the quality of the rum, a festering wound, the maddening itch of lice. They are pragmatic, desperate men, not revolutionaries. The legend is a story for people who sleep in clean beds, who have never had to choose between a weevil and an empty stomach. You are the reality. The grimy, anonymous sailor whose name will never be recorded. You are the man who survived the fever, the bad water, the surgeon's knife, and the soul-crushing boredom. The stories will never mention the smell, the taste of rotten water, or the constant, gnawing fear of a splinter. They will leave out the filth, because the truth is simply too disgusting to be a good adventure. The legend of the pirate is a comforting lie. You, in your itchy, stinking reality, are the uncomfortable truth. The sun dips below the horizon, and the sky bleeds into a soft, deep indigo. The ship's bell marks the changing of the watch, its gentle chime fading into the vast quiet of the ocean. You find your way back to your hammock, the familiar creak of the ropes a strangely comforting sound. The day is done. The struggles, the memories, the sharp edges of reality begin to soften in the gathering dark. The gentle, rhythmic rocking of the ship is no longer a torment to your stomach. It has become a lullaby. It is the deep, slow breathing of the sea itself, pulling you down into rest. The sounds of the 'tween deck fade into a low, indistinct hum, the snores of the men, the whisper of water against the hull, they all merge into a single, soothing drone. The hard canvas of your hammock seems to soften, to cradle you, and the constant motion is no longer a lurch, but a gentle, sweeping sway, like being rocked in an ancient cradle. The story begins to dissolve. The faces of your shipmates, the smell of tar and drum, the sharp taste of salt, they recede, becoming like old photographs, their details blurring at the edges. Your thoughts, which have been racing for so long, now slow to a gentle drift, like seaweed floating on a calm tide. You are no longer on the ship. You are no longer on the ship. You are in the memory of the ship, and even that is fading, washed clean by the quiet waves of oncoming sleep. The itch is gone. The fear is a distant echo. There is only the darkness, no longer threatening, but warm and deep and welcoming, like a heavy velvet blanket. Let the current take you. There are no more ropes to haul, no more watches to stand. The journey is over. Rest now. Drift into the quiet deep.